Okay.
Here we go. Okay, so let's start.
Everybody mute. There are people not muted.
So good to see you. Figured that I would, this is the last year before Purim, so I would take advantage of that and discuss an issue which is ironically unique to Israel, and specifically to Yerushalayim. Which is, maybe I'll mention the irony in a moment, exactly why it is so as ironic as it is. But first, let's talk about a little bit more basic information and try to get a sense of the very unique nature of Purim. As you know, Purim is the only holiday in which we celebrate 2 different days. And the emphasis is that it's on 2 different days. It's not like, let's say, Yom Tov Sheni in Chutz La'aretz, where whoever is in Chutz La'aretz is going to keep 2 days because of some kind of safek or whatever other reason may apply. But rather, it is designated specifically for different people on different days. So that is unique in the annals of halacha. There's nothing like it, that we have something which applies to some people on some days and doesn't apply at all to them on the other day, and the inverse applying to other people. And of course, the way that we call Shushan Purim, because of the background of the day, the holiday, which we'll talk about just one moment. But in reality, perhaps Shushan, if there are Jews today in modern Susa, so then they perhaps will keep the 15th. But other than that, there is, to the best of my knowledge, other than Yerushalayim, there's no city that keeps exclusively the 15th. We'll perhaps talk about the very brief focus of what goes on in some cities where they keep 2 days and why they keep 2 days. But basically, in Yerushalayim is the only city today where it's exclusively, to the best of my knowledge, exclusively the 15th. Everywhere else, it's the 14th, or perhaps the 14th and the 15th because of some kind of safek. How does that happen? Where did that come from? And we've been brought up with it for so long that we don't really think about it. And of course, if we think back to the days when we were in grade school, so it was the 15th was a perfect day for all of the holiday celebrations that you do in school. But what's the purpose of the 15th? Here in Israel, you're not able to do that. You have the 14th and the 15th, so they have to, and they can't do anything on the 13th. So basically, Purim becomes a full week. But what is what's going on? How does this happen? So let's look at some Makorot, and I want to apologize. It's not on the printed. This first part, we're going to get to the printed, the file that was sent out. It was my mistake. I wanted to add this to that file, and I sent out the wrong version. So let me just put on the screen, though, the first page, which is really background information. Just one second. And so here we go. So this is just as a background for the idea of keeping the 14th and the 15th. Where does this come from? So before we start anything, I think that we should review some psukim and to see within the context of the Gemara, the context of the Megillah, how this plays out. So at the end of the Megillah, and after the story has transpired and Haman is long hanged and the children of Haman have been strung up, all of that is over. And now the Megillah, the end of the Megillah, Perek Tet, perhaps the real end of the Megillah is Perek Yud with the taxes. That's not my discussion now. But from the Purim perspective, the end of the Megillah is Perek Tet. And this is the part of the Megillah where many of us begin to drift off a little bit because of the information, and it's really critical to take a look at the way that the Megillah describes the development of the holiday at the time of Purim. So we pick it up in the middle of Perek Tet, and the Megillah says, "Biyom 13 l'chodesh Adar, v'noach ba'arba asar bo, va'asa oto yom mishteh b'simcha." So they fought on the 13th day of Adar, they rested on the 14th, and they made it into a day of feasting and of joy. Now, what is being described here? What's being described here is actually in real time what happened the first year. Basically you have a battle throughout the 127 provinces of Achashverosh. And now the Jews, forgetting about what happened in Shushan, the Jews and the rest of the empire have finished their fight. It's the 14th, it's the day after, and it's, to use a term going back to, let's say, World War II, it's VJ Day. It's a day where you are celebrating the victory in real time, looking back at it. And it's interesting to note that we don't celebrate, nor did they celebrate, the day that the victory happened. It's not like Yom Yerushalayim, let's say, where on Yom Yerushalayim, we don't celebrate the Chavtet, the day after they freed Yerushalayim. We celebrate the anniversary of the actual day. So I've been asked to increase the font size, so I will do that. And that's a little bit too much. So now, that's still too much. That's better. Okay, so now we have this the 14th is the day after we're celebrating. Now, the way that it's focused here is that it is being said as a yom. Oh, for some reason I don't have. For some reason, it's not letting me do highlighting. I apologize. I don't know what's wrong. But it says, V'asa oto yom mishteh v'simcha. Yom mishteh v'simcha means that they just have a feast. So it's a spontaneous party, and that's the way it is. Now, Pasuk Yudchet, V'Yehudim asher b'Shushan nikhalu b'shlosha asar bo u'v'arba asar bo v'noach b'chamisha asar bo v'asa oto Yom Mishteh v'Simcha. So similarly, the Jews in Shushan who fought and gathered on the 13th and the 14th, so they also had a spontaneous celebration on the 15th. But now we come to Pasuk Yutet. Al Kain HaYehudim HaPrazim HaYoshvim Be'arei HaPrazot Osim Et Yom 14 LaChodesh Adar Simcha u'Mishteh v'Yom Tov u'Mishloach Manot Ish L'Reyehu. So this is a new stage. Remember, they just already told us that we did a Yom Mishteh v'Simcha. I really wish I could highlight it. But here, it doesn't say, now we have additional things. Simcha, Mishteh, Yom Tov, Mishloach Manot, Ish L'Reyehu. What's going on? What's going on is the Al-Kain at the beginning of Pasuk Yutet. Al-Kain is referring to the second year. In other words, basically, the anniversary of the first Purim, there's a grassroots movement. Who wants it? The Yehudim HaPrazim, the Jews who are living in the outlying areas, we'll say, or the open cities. So they celebrate Osim, right? They're in the present tense. They decided to make a holiday to commemorate what had occurred the year before. And the commemoration has the Simcha u'Mishteh, but they added several things. They added Yom Tov, and they add Mishloach Manot. Why would they add Yom Tov? Because Yom Tov, and this is the way Chazal understood the word Yom Tov, Chazal understood Yom Tov to mean they included an Isur Melacha. In other words, they basically turned it into a mini Pesach or Shavuot. And they said that, okay, remember, we're dealing with a period of time. There's no precedent for this. There's no holiday where you have a rabbinic or prophetic holiday that has been established. All the holidays until this point are Torah holidays. So what are you going to do? So the answer is, we'll model it after the Torah. All the holidays in the Torah have Isur Malacha. So we will also have Isur Malacha for our holiday. The Mishloach Manot, which are added, so this is something which is a little bit odd to us, but it's not odd to them. If you take a look at Sefer Ezra, I don't have the psukim here in front of me, but if you take a look at Sefer Ezra, Ezra refers to the celebration of Rosh Hashanah. And in the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, they talk about ichlu v'shtu v'simchu, eat, drink, be happy, v'tishluchu manot ish l'reyehu. So there is a notion of mishloach manot already being celebrated as part of Yom Tov celebrations. At that time, they would give mishlochei manot, basically as a means of other people being able to celebrate as well, to spread the joy. So that's year 2. We have this spontaneous celebration in year 1. We have a grassroots movement in year 2 to create a new holiday. Pasuk Chaf, Vayichtov Mordechai et hadvarim ha'eleh. So Mordechai writes all of this. Vayishlach Sfarim el kol haYudim asher b'chol midinot hamelach Achashverosh hakrovim v'harechokim. So now we reach the legislation stage. Mordechai has received word of this movement. Perhaps it's not clear whether he gets word of it before or after. But we'll say, for argument's sake, just to keep the flow of the psukim, that he receives word of what had occurred in the grassroots level sometime after that anniversary, that second Purim, and he decides to legislate. He writes it down. What does the legislation hold? Pasuk Chaf Aleph, L'kayem aleihem. In other words, basically Mordechai is now endorsing what has already been accepted by the Jews on the grassroots level. So he's l'kayem aleihem, liot osim et yom 14 l'chodesh adar vet yom 15 bo b'chol shana v'shana, to make the 14th, and now he adds the 15th. The Jews had only kept the 14th because they were the Jews in the outlying areas. Mordechai introduces in the legislation the 14th and the 15th, and he also incorporates to make sure that it's not going to be only the first year, meaning the first anniversary or the second anniversary, something that's going to peter out. He wants it to be something which is going to be an annual event. Hayamim, so now's the explanation. Why the 14th and the 15th? Because these are the days, emphasis on the days, Hayamim, the days that the Jews have rested from their enemies. And in this month, which turned from sorrow to joy, from mourning to Yom Tov. Now the word Yom Tov is here in the sense of, you'd say, oh, didn't you just say Yom Tov means a holiday? No, it's the Chodesh, which has turned Me'evel Yom Tov. Yom Tov is now going to have a slightly different meaning because look how we actually keep it. La'asot otam, here in the bold and in the italics, Yemei mishteh b'simcha u'mishloach manot reyehu u'madatot le'evyonim. Take a look what Mordechai has done. He's taken out the Yom Tov of the celebration, back above here in the italics, mishteh pasuk yutet, mishteh v'yom tov u'mishloach manot. So he's taken out the Yom Tov. It's not here, but he's added manot le'evyonim. But basically, Mordechai says, well, if you're going to have this holiday, you're not going to include the Yom Tov. We're not going to legislate a day of the Isur Malacha. But what we will do is include the people who are disenfranchised. Because Mishloach Manot Ish L'Reyehu is where I send it to my friend, to my fellow. But the people who are on the fringes of society, the Evyonim, so they get nothing. Matanot LeEvyonim ensures that they're going to be included as well. Now the Torah continues, the Megillah continues, so the emphasis here in Pasuk Chav Gimel, just in case you weren't sure that my description of the events was true, Pasuk Chav Gimel makes sure that you realize that it is, because it's Asher Hechelu La'asot, what they began to do, Ve'et Asher Katav Mordechai Aleihem, and what Mordechai wrote. In other words, the Megillah is stressing there was this grassroots movement, and then Mordechai adds on to it. And the Jews subsequently keep all of it. Kiblu haYehudim aleihem v'al zaram v'al nilvim aleihem v'lo ya'avor liot osim et shnei hayamim ha'ele kichtavam v'chizmanam b'chol shana v'shana. They accepted to keep both days, as was for all of history, all of posterity. This is going to become a legislated holiday. But it's not going to be something which is going to peter out over time, as probably would have happened had there not been this kind of legislation. If you think about it, when was the last time someone really celebrated VJ Day? Right? Might have been an incredible moment at the time when we think back more than 75 years ago, almost 80 years ago, but it's at best something that gets a mention in the newspaper, if there is such a thing as a newspaper anymore, gets online, and that's it. It's mentioned, but it's not something which is going to be celebrated. We've moved on from that, right? The same way, I mean, all it takes an invasion of the Ukraine, and people have moved on from the pandemic. So certainly, if it's going to be something which takes place over decades and centuries, people are going to forget it. But it's here; it's been legislated, and that's why it's going to be remembered. Hayamim ha'ela nizkarim v'nasim b'chol dor v'dor mishpacha, etc., etc. So this is the idea. Now, if I take a look at the psukim, it's not clear what's going on. I'm not going to get into an analysis today of how Chazal took this to be turned into two holidays, meaning the 14th and the 15th. I could have said that just from reading this pasuk, l'kayem liot osim, pasuk chaf aleph again, liot osim et yom 14 l'chodesh adar vet yom 15 bo b'chol shana v'shana. I could have understood that everybody keeps 2 days, that we celebrate what happened on the 14th and we celebrate what happened on the 15th. Right? We should have 2 days of Purim. Not that the way that we understand it. Now, I just want to take what I think is a very seminal piece of the Ramban. The Ramban, at the beginning of Masechet Megillah, working off of the sugyot that describe how the halacha works out the way that we're familiar with it. So the Ramban, as the Ramban is wont to do, the Ramban is really the first of the Mefarshim to take historical information and to turn it into a vital component of understanding the psukim. And so the Ramban, and basically all of the things that we do now is in large part due to the Ramban's influence. So it's really important to keep that in mind. But the Ramban, here it's not on a parish, it's in his parish to the Gemara Megillah, in the Chidushei Ramban. So he says the following: he's trying to figure out it's a much longer piece. He's trying to figure out how is it that we celebrate on the 14th outside of Shushan, and specifically outside of Yerushalayim, and on the 15th in the walled cities, and why should it be the walled cities in general, and why should it be the walled cities from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun, and not from the walled cities in the time of Mordechai and Esther, if you're going to go that route. And so all of this is in the background in terms of this piece of the Ramban. And the Ramban says, you know what I did in order to try to figure this out? I looked at the psukim. And again, I want to apologize. I don't know why my computer isn't allowing me to highlight. So, but please bear with me. And when I looked at the psukim, nityashev li ha'inyan yafeh. So then I figured it all out. Lefi shu davar barur, shebizmano shel nes ze kfar nifkedu Yisrael va'alu la'aretz b'rishayon koresh v'nityashvu ba'arehem. So the Ramban says, he doesn't say I looked at the Megillah. He says I looked in the Ketuvim. He looked in Ezra. He looked in the Chagai, Malachim, Zechariah. He looked in in Daniel. He looked in all of the works that are basically contemporary, roughly speaking, to Masechet Megillah. And to this day, I'm not saying that the Ramban necessarily is the only way of looking at the historical development overarching, but to this day, one of the major questions of people who are learning the Megillah is where does it fit in with all of those other books? What's going on? If you read Sefer Ezra, for example, you don't get a very strong image of what is going on elsewhere in the Persian Empire. And if you read the Megillah, you have no idea that there are any Jews at all in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael isn't mentioned at all in the Megillah. So, but we know that there are Jews in Eretz Yisrael when you're reading the Megillah, and there are Jews in Shushan when you're reading Sefer Ezra. And of course, there are Jews elsewhere. There are Jews in Bavel. There are Jews throughout the empire. That's what Haman said, right? That it's Am Mufuzar Mufurad Mikol Amim, that there's this nation which is scattered throughout. So the Ramban says, I looked at all of the psukim together, and this is his conclusion. He says that if you go back a little bit earlier, right, it's not totally clear how many years earlier, and now is not the time to try to figure out different approaches, but we'll say a few decades earlier. So the Jews had been allowed to return to Eretz Yisrael with the approval of Koresh, of Cyrus the Great. So this is the first wave of Jewish return to Eretz Yisrael. This is Zerubbabel, this is Yehoshua Kohen Gadol, this is Chagai, this is Zechariah. So this is who's going back to Eretz Yisrael. V'nityashvu ba'arehem. V'af al pi, and this is a very interesting observation of the Ramban. It says, Af al pi she'amar Haman, yeshno am echad mefuzar mefurad ben ha'amim. So even though Haman said that there is one nation which is scattered throughout the world, Mikom makom anshei knesset hagdola imrov Israel, and this is something which is controversial in the Ramban. But the Ramban wants to claim that be'eretz ba'aretz hayu. So the Ramban wants to claim that in the first wave of that aliyah, most of the Jews did return, because later on, v'shuv lo alu mehem el ma'atim im Ezra. When Ezra talks about the 40,000 or so Jews that returned with him, you get the impression only 40,000 Jews have returned. But that's not true. That's the second wave. In the first wave, we don't know how many Jews returned. The Nevi'im don't tell us, or the Ketuvim don't tell us how many Jews returned with Chagai, how many Jews returned with Zechariah. We don't know. So the Ramban wants to claim that certainly Anshei Knesset HaGedolah is there, or as the Jewish leadership is there, and Rov Yisrael, most of the Jews. So this isn't as strange as it sounds, by the way, because if you think about it, whether they were in Eretz Yisrael or elsewhere, today, how many ever millions of Jews there are. And we know that they're basically concentrated in a few countries, and really, maybe only 2 countries, in Eretz Yisrael and the United States. If you want to take a look at really the major population centers of Jewry today, throw in France, maybe Russia, Ukraine, etc. But those are the secondary centers. And then you have small groups of Jews throughout the world. And if you were a person were to try to, a historian a few hundred years from now, were to try to figure out Jewish settlement in the 21st century based on Chabad houses. So you might get an impression that one of the major areas of Jewish settlement is Thailand. But we know that's not true. So the same thing is holding true here with regard to the Megillah. We're saying there are Jews throughout the world, but there are certain concentrations. There's concentration in Eretz Yisrael. There's a concentration perhaps in Bavel. There's a concentration here in Shushan. But basically, the Jews are concentrated in certain areas, the Ramban says, and scattered throughout the rest. So now the Ramban makes an observation which to us isn't so obvious, but if you're living in the ancient and medieval period, it is very obvious that the Ramban says who is at most at risk. People, remember, you have a one-day pogrom that's been declared by Haman. Who is most at risk in this kind of situation? So the Ramban says the people who are most at risk are the people who don't have a wall to, don't have a wall to retreat behind. You see that in the Crusades, that the Jews who were in walled cities were able to sometimes withstand the mobs by retreating into fortified areas inside the cities. And those Jews who didn't have that, they were the ones who fell victim. So or certainly fell victim first. If you have more than one day, those fortifications can be breached. So you have one day. So the Jews who were in the open areas were much more at risk and much more exposed than the Jews who were in the walled cities. V'chinyan shamar behem b'sefer Ezra. V'hi kasher shamu Sanballat v'Tuvia v'Haravim v'Hamonim v'Ashdodim ki alta aruka l'chomot Yerushalayim. So when the other nations who were living in Eretz Yisrael, we'll call them the Palestinians, when they heard that the Jews were building fortifications around Yerushalayim, so they were very, very upset and very disturbed that the Jews were rebuilding the walls of Yerushalayim, because that was, in effect, going to give them defense against the other nations who were around. So now, skipping a couple lines, so now they're getting back to the Megillah. So basically every Jew who was at danger celebrated. But then, and in Shushan, they celebrated on the 15th. But now in the second paragraph. So now the Jews who lived in unwalled cities had this grassroots movement to start celebrating. But the Jews who lived in walled cities didn't do anything. They didn't feel the risk looking back. They looked at it as the other Jews' holiday. Think of it in the sense of the way that Yom HaAtzmaut is celebrated by Zionist Jews in Chutz La'aretz. So you're going to have you'll eat your falafel, you'll maybe have a gathering in schools or in shuls, you'll say Hallel, you're very happy for the Jews who were at risk and for this event that occurred, but it's not exactly your holiday either. Right, and that's why Yom HaAtzmaut has such a completely different feel here in Eretz Yisrael, in Midat Yisrael, than it has in Chutz La'aretz. So Purim, in effect, is the Yom HaAtzmaut of that generation. So the people who didn't feel affected by it directly, they only felt affected by it indirectly, so they didn't really celebrate. And and that's why the Mukafin are not mentioned at all, the Ramban says, in this in the Megillah at that stage. Amad Mordechai, new paragraph here. Amad Mordechai ubeitino v'ra'u divreihem shel prazim shera'u yanes hazeh lasot lo zecher ledorot v'kavu oto al kol Yisrael shekulan haya b'safek. So Mordechai and his Beit Din see it differently. So they agree with what the Jews in the open areas did on their own. However, they want to make sure that it's everybody's holiday. And how are they going to do it? They're going to do it by having just lo yamru arechokim mishushanu me'eretz Yisrael lo hayu haman b'siato in aleinu. This underlined line in the middle, that the Jews elsewhere shouldn't say that the Jews in Shushan were at risk because that was the center where Haman was, and the Jews in Eretz Yisrael were at risk because they were in open areas and they had their own enemies. But the rest of us, we were okay. In order to do that, we have a separate holiday for the Mukafim. We have a separate holiday for the walled cities specifically. We model it after Shushan. But what we're trying to tell us, what Mordechai is trying to tell those Jews, is that wherever you are and whatever your circumstances are, in effect, don't think that you can escape. You're not going to escape the fate of the Jewish people. Your danger is their danger, or their danger is your danger, and your celebration and their celebration is the same celebration. So ironically, paradoxically, the Ramban says the way to go about doing that is not to have everybody celebrating on the 14th. Because if you have everybody celebrating on the 14th, or even if you have everyone celebrating on the 14th or the 15th, the message doesn't get across, because then whoever didn't feel at risk would still not feel at risk. The way to get the message across is by making those people have the sense that they too have their own holiday. And that's why the 15th was established. Okay, so that's the way the Ramban understands it. And he has one last area to talk about, and that is why specifically the walled cities from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. So he says the following, Achshav birarnu haktuvim. So now the last paragraph here. Now we figured it all out. And now I understand why we divided into 2 days. So in reality, it is really we should have made the holiday based on where there were walled cities in the time of Achashverosh, in the time of Mordechai, and time of Esther. Vihi hayta chareva shadayin lo banu baklum mishat aliyatan. So, because the primary miracle occurred in Eretz Yisrael, sort of the opposite of the way we frequently talk about how Purim is a holiday of Chutz La'aretz. The Ramban says no. The major nace occurred in Eretz Yisrael because that's where the Jews were concentrated and that's where they were most exposed. And perhaps that's where they had the most enemies. So the Jews were most exposed there. That's the Ikar Hanes. But what can you do? They don't have walls. So therefore, the Lo Banu Klum Mishat Aliyatan, because they had never been able to build the walls up to that point. Lo Ra'ui Shiyu Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh V'chol Arei Yehuda V'Yisrael HaBetzurot Nidano K'da Arei HaPrazim. So now it's in. The Ramban says it's inappropriate that Eretz Yisrael should be viewed as an open place. It should be viewed as a walled place, a walled city. That's Kvodo Shel Eretz Yisrael. If you ask me, this is the weakest link in the Ramban's argument. He's made a very compelling case until now, and here it seems that okay, we have this halacha in terms of Mimot Yoshua ben Nun, and it's going to be l'chvodo shel Eretz Yisrael. That's true. That's already mentioned in the Yerushalayim. It's mentioned in it's mentioned elsewhere. But having said that, it doesn't exactly fit the Ramban's narrative, to be totally honest. But that is that's something that, if you will, that's a relatively minor detail. Yeah, Harold.
The Ramban seems to ignore the fact that those in Shushan did get another day, right, to defend themselves.
Right.
So why is he ignore? That seems to be a pretty clear historical fact that would link this additional day to a celebration. No, doesn't mention that.
Right. He briefly touched upon it, but basically the idea is the following: the Ramban is claiming that that Mordechai scratched his head a little bit and says, "I have a problem." In other words, it could be that I will want the Jews to, let's say there wasn't this idea of people not feeling exposed, not feeling that it's their holiday. So then maybe he would have included Shushan, maybe he wouldn't have included Shushan. I don't know. But what according to the Ramban again, what Mordechai did was say, okay, I have a moment in time that I can hang this on. If there hadn't been the extra day in Shushan, I don't know what Mordechai would have done to bring in the other people. We don't add another day of Yom HaAtzmaut for people in Chutz La'aretz. Right? We don't have another day, but Mordechai had that luxury. So he could say, okay, we have this extra day where people who were in walled cities rested, right? We have the paradigm of the walled city of Shushan. So you're in a walled city, you also rest. And with that idea, you're going to hopefully get the notion across to people that they should feel part of the celebration too. That's the way the Ramban views it. In other words, without the celebration in Shushan, we wouldn't have had an extra day for the Mukafin. Once we have it for Shushan, so then we can hang our hat on that. Okay, Stephen, what decided who went first, walled or non-walled? I think that the answer, if I understand the question correctly, is that since the 14th was the day that was the celebration for the non-walled people, so that was already the day that was in that they had to work with, and since they had to work with that, they just continued working with that. And the 15th was the add-on. Okay, so that's if you will, that's part one of the shir. You could call it the introduction, but since 35 minutes or so has passed, but about 50% of the shir has passed already, I'll just call it part one. So now part two. Part two is saying, okay, we have this din of that we have these 2 days of Shushan. Now let's figure out what's going on in terms of who's included. What is celebrated as an Ir Mukaf. So let's share the Daf Mekorot that did go out yesterday. And here, let's take a look at whether you have it in print or you're using you're looking at the shared screen. So let's take a look at it, and I'll see if maybe now that I closed it and reopened it, maybe I will have the possibility to use things for the highlights. Let's see if that works. Nope, it's still not working. I don't know why.
Click Enable Editing.
Let's see if that works. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, simple enough. Okay, so now let's go on. So now so here we have the Gemara and Megillah. So the Gemara says the following. Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, source number 1. Krach b'kol hasamuchla b'chol hanire'ima. So if you have a city, a walled city, or any location which is near to it, or is seen with it, nidon kikrach. Now, nire'imo is understood as meaning that if you're in the walled city, you see that neighboring village. Okay? Ad kama. So now, how far is close? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah v'itema Rabbi Chia bar Abba k'mechmatan l'Tveria. From the distance of Chamatan to Tveria, which is a mil, a Roman mile, roughly a kilometer. If you are the people who use a smaller shear, the Grach Na'eh shear, it's about 940 meters. If you use the Chazon Ish shear, it's about 1,200 meters. But basically, we'll say roughly a kilometer is what's considered to be samuch. Fine. The Gemara continues and says, Gufa, okay, let's look at this idea a little bit more carefully. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, krach v'chol hasamuch lo v'chol hanireh imo nidon ki krach. Tana. Excuse me. So we have a misorah with regard to this concept. Samuch, afal pi she'eno nireh, nireh, afal pi she'eno samuch. So these are not necessary conditions. These are sufficient conditions. Any one of them, either samuch or nireh, will be sufficient in order to view that location as being part of the walled city. So the Gemara says, Bishlam, and that makes a lot of sense, nireh afal pi she'eno samuch. If you have something which is seen, even though it's not near, mishkachat la, kigon diyatva b'rosh hahar. That happens, well, all the time. If you're if the city is, as is frequently the case, that the walled city is at the highest point in the area for defense reasons. So if you're at that point, you can see, for miles. And so now that is a case of nireh afal pi she'eno samuch. But samuch afal pi she'eno nireh. But if you're talking about a situation where it's near but you don't see it, how does that work? If you have a situation where the inverse, that you can have something which is really close by, but if it's a deep enough wadi where you're situated, so you won't see what's around you. Right, the hilltops around will block the view. So that's samuch afal pi she'eno nireh. Okay, that's the Gemara. Now there are two ways to understand this Gemara. The first, which I think most of us would probably would go with, is mentioned by several Rishonim. I'll just take the Ritva, number 3. Dat Rabotai. So the Ritva says that the opinion of my teachers, Kol samuchu de bisharinan b'mil, the kevan she'eno nireh imo lo chashiv samuch bioter mimil. When did we use the mile, the kilometer? When is that the yardstick? So the answer is that we use that when it is kevan she'eno nireh lo chashiv samuch bioter mimil. If you can't see it, and you ask how close is close, so there the answer is it's going to be when it's a kilometer away. But benireh kolshu nireh imo mishtatef imo be'enehem le'shiura. So but if you're dealing with something which is seen, so then literally I can see for miles and miles, and any location which can be seen from the city. And now here it's not totally clear. What is mishtat? This is going to be important for us later on. What is mishtatef imo be'enehem? Does that mean that that's something that you can see? Right? Basically, it's a sort of a recapitulation of what was said before, nireh imo, and so he's explaining that means that you can see it, or does that mean more that mishtatef imo be'enehem, meaning that it's like inyanam, it's a part of the greater metropolitan area? That's a slightly open question, at least from the Ritva, but I think most people would say that it means that if you can see it from Yerushalayim. So if we pick Yerushalayim as our example, so if that's the case, so there are, that's a long distance. Right? You can see from Yerushalayim, from the wall, from the old city, you can see parts of Gush Etzion. You can see all the way to see all the way to Jordan on a clear day. Right? That because of the drop off, that again depends on the angle. It could be that Har Tzofim blocks it, but from certain angles, you can see the all the way into Jordan because of the drop off of Midbar Yehuda, and you can then see Harei Moav. So, how far is far? That's very far. Is that really all going to be considered Yerushalayim? Because that if you have an overlook spot, you can see it. So that's the question that we have to deal with. The Rambam, on the other hand, seems to say something else. The Rambam says the following: Ben ir shalach lekrach, uben krach shalach leir. So the first part isn't really important for me right now. We'll just read the Rambam though. They're talking about a question if you have the city boy and the country mouse. So are we looking at this as when do you celebrate, right? The Salacha, we spoke about this actually 3-4 years ago. The question of going from one place to another, and do you celebrate the 14th? Do you celebrate the 15th? I don't want to get into that right now. It's a different topic. However, the last line, krach, the kola samuchla, the kola nire'ima. But now if you have a city and anything near it and something which is visible from it, im ein beinehem yoter al alpayim ama. So if you don't have more than 2,000 amot is the meal. Hareza kikrach v'korin b'chamisha asar. So then it's considered to be a krach, and you read it on the 15th. It sounds from the Rambam that the meal is actually defining the nire'imo. You have kol samuchlo, the kol nire'imo, that you can, anything that you can see up to 2,000 amot. Right, that's the as opposed to that mishtatef imo be'enehem. Right, it sounds as though back in the Ritva, sounds as though the other green, it sounds as though that anything that you can see. And here, according to the Rambam, as far as you can see for a mile, that's as far as you can go, not more than that. If that's the case, so then you have to ask almost the inverse of what what was asked earlier. In other words, if the Ritva theoretically can extend it for tens of kilometers in any direction, so the Rambam has to explain what it means samuchlo. What is called a samuchlo? If it's not within the meal, it sounds that samuchlo is less. So if samuchlo is less, what's going on? So in this bothered the commentators of the Rambam, and basically two approaches were given. Right, the first was given by, I'm just taking here the Kesef Mishnah, the Perush of the Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, to the Rambam, and so he quotes an earlier opinion, the Magid Mishnah, Rav HaMagid. So he says that the Magid Mishnah wants to squeeze the Rambam into the accepted psak, which was voiced by the Ritva that we saw already. So he says that indeed the proper reading of the Rambam, according to the Magid Mishnah, is Chatav Shenuscha Amitit Krach V'chol HaNire'imo V'chol HaSamuchlo. In other words, he wants to claim that the somewhere along the line, the order got mixed up. It's not kol hasamuchlo v'chol hanire'imo. That's not the way you should read it, but rather you should be reading it as kol hanire'imo v'chol hasamuchlo up to a kilometer, which makes a lot of sense. But the Kesef Mishnah continues that it might be, you're right, that there might have been somewhere along a copyist error that led us to that idea. That could be. Aval ma na'aseh, the next line in bold. Ma na'aseh. But what are we going to do? V'hatur katav. If you only looking at the Rambam, so it's just a simple switch of the order. But now let's take a look at what the Tur, the later authority, writes, and he writes the following: Kena kfarim asmuchim lahem afilu einam nirim imehem kigon shehem be'emek o shenirim imehem afilu einam smuchim kigon shehem bahar ubilvad shelo yu rochokim yoter mimah. So here here it's way too explicit to explain it the way that the Magid Mishnah wanted to say in the Rambam. Basically, he's saying if it's close, so then it's close. And if it's far away, meaning that it's not considered close, but you can see it, they will also read, but how far? A mile. So there's no way, he says, that you can fit the Tur and then he's going to continue the Ran as well into this. So the Kesef Mishnah comes up with a different idea. And what is that? So he gives one explanation, which I'm not going to read right now because I want to get into the major one, which is the alternate explanation. He says the following, to the bold print here at the bottom of the piece, Inami, or alternatively, here is the another explanation. Efshar lefaresh dechi ba'i va'ad kama lo ba'i asamuch. The samuch mishtama samuch mamash. The Gemara, when it asked, how close is close? So the Gemara wasn't asking about something which is adjacent, because that's samuch. The Hainu, and now he gives a halakhic definition from another area of halacha, which we'll talk about in a moment. The Hainu bi ibura shel ir. Ibura shel ir means in the perhaps along the lines of the swelling of the city, along the lines of mu'uberet, of pregnancy, that the idea is that you have in the bulge of the city, and we're going to see what that means in a halacha in just one moment. But the Gemara was asking not about samuch, because we know what samuch means. Samuch means right next to it, adjacent to it. What is nireh? Does nireh have any limitations? And the answer is nireh has limitations. The ein svara lomar shafilu rachok kama prasot lefishu nireh min akrach yeni don kamohu, because it doesn't make any sense at all. The Kesef Mishnah say, if you think about it, that just because I can get onto an observation point in Yerushalayim, and I can look far away and see in the distance, I can see the outskirts of Efrat. And you can see there, and you have to know what to look for. It's easier to look for Yerushalayim from Efrat than it is for Efrat from Yerushalayim. But still, you can, if you know what you're looking for, you can see it. So, but does it really make sense to call that a part of Yerushalayim just because you can see it? So that doesn't make sense. So there has to be a limit, and this is the limit. The limit is a kilometer. What is we talking about? What area of halacha is this based on? So this is based on the halachot of tchumin on Shabbat and Yom Tov. The halacha is that you're not allowed to walk distances from a inhabited area on Shabbat. So if you are, let's say a simple case, if you are a Jew who is in a national park somewhere. Just thinking about something that I had this situation about a dozen years or so ago. So we were renting a rental in Yosemite National Park in California, and it's a group of houses inside the park. So let's make it even clearer. You're the one house in the forest. So then you have a 2,000 amma, a mil radius to work with around there. But let's say there were a few houses, so or a village or a town. So you're allowed the entire perimeter of the town, and it's much more complicated than the way I'm explaining it right now, but we'll make it a simple case where the perimeters are even. So then you have 2,000 amot from all of from the outer perimeter of your town. However, let's say things aren't so simple, and you have patch houses. I don't think that's English, is it? But you have a patchy type of settlement where you have one house here, and then a few little further along, you have another house, and then another house. So how do you judge the perimeter? From where? So there, the Gemara, and here it's just the Psak Halacha, we work with this idea that source number 8 in terms of Tchumin. So the idea is that you have a much smaller radius. The amount of time, this is the Ibura Shel Ir, Im Haya Beino Uvein Ha'ir, Shiv'im Ama U'Shnei Shlishim. Don't ask me now why we picked that number. Not important for me right now. The idea is that you only have 70 amot. Okay, 70 amot is about 35 meters. It's not a very large area. Now, you could, and there are those who say that's from one town, the extension from one town, and if you the neighboring town also gives you that amount, so you can maybe ratchet it up to 141. In other words, each house, not the town, excuse me, each house has 70 amot to work with. So you can build it up together to 141 amot, because it's 70 and 2/3, so 141 and 1/3. So that'll give you a distance of 70 amot. But that's what's called the Ibura Shel Ir. That is the natural extension of the city itself. That's what samuch is. If you're within we'll take the more makel approach. If you're within 140 meters of, 140 amot, so that's 70 meters or so, from the border of the city, or from the last house of the city, so then you're considered samuch. That is that's how we're going to view it. If, on the other hand, you're not within that 70 or 140 amot, you're not within that much smaller radius, but you can be seen from the city, so then you'll have a mile. Then you'll have that as I said, really not a mile, it's a kilometer. Then you'll have that kilometer to work with. Okay, that's the way that the Kesef Mishnah explains the Ramban. Interestingly enough, in the Shulchan Aruch, now going back to source number 6, the Shulchan Aruch has a choice of different opinions to follow. Who did he pick? Did he pick his reading of the Rambam, or did he pick the Ritva? He seems to pick the Ritva. He says the following: Kain kfarim hanirim imahem, afilu einam smuchim. So similarly, now back to Purim issues. If you have a village which is seen by it, even if it's not so close, Kagon Shehem Bahar, because, for example, it's on a hilltop, O Shismuchim Lahem, Afilu Einam Nirim Imahem, or it's close, even though it's not seen, Kagon Shehem Be'emek, Ubilvad Shiyu Rechokim Yoter Mimel, Lo Rechokim Yoter Mimel. As long as it's not more than a kilometer. So the Shulchan Aruch himself, when he paskins, he chooses the Ritva. In other words, he explains the Rambam very nicely, but in terms of and remember, it's not just the Rambam, it's the Tur, it's the Ran, it's these other opinions as well. But the Shulchan Aruch seems to follow the psak of the Ritva. Okay, now that's where things stood, if you will, until the very end of the 19th century. Because again, historically speaking, the only city that really continued to keep the 15th was Yerushalayim. And as we know, so Yerushalayim didn't have any outer neighborhoods until the latter half of the 19th century. And the first group of those neighborhoods from the wall, and it seems, by the way, that the wall that was being used isn't necessarily the wall of of what was in the time of let's say Yehoshua, which then it would only be Ir David, or the later times. It seems that when the city expands within the walls, that's considered to be the city. So now you have the boundaries of what we call today the Ir Atika. So the first neighborhoods right across the valley, so they were both Samuch and Nireh. So there wasn't really much of a question. The question becomes when you now have the newer neighborhoods, for example, let's say Bukharin, or which was founded in the 1890s, or Mea Sharim, or further on Sanhedria, which is the beginning of the 20th century. So what about those? Are they going to be included in Yerushalayim, or are they going to not be included in Yerushalayim? Next stage after that, when you have a sprawl connecting the neighborhoods, but those neighborhoods are no longer within the walls. So why should they be considered samuch? They should be considered nireh. How do you view it? Right. So that's up to what point? Right. If you were now to have a situation the way that we have today, where you have the boundaries of the municipality from Ramot in the north to Gilo in the south, right, going out to Harat Sofim in the east, right, and actually beyond, if you think about it in terms of the Neve Yaakov, etc., or and going all the way to Ein Karen. So all of that's Yerushalayim. So is that really Yerushalayim? You certainly can't see most of that area from the Ir Atika. Is that how do you view that? Should we be considering it as the 40th? Should we be considering it as the 15th? So there are three basic approaches here, and this and it's very and we'll discuss them. So the first approach, it was put forth at the beginning of the 20th century by Rav Tukachinsky, a very influential figure in Psak Halacha in the early 20th century, and specifically here in Eretz Yisrael. His luach that he put together is still used in many Batei Knesset. So he wrote a sefer called Ir HaKodesh VaMikdash, talking about Yerushalayim, the boundaries of Yerushalayim, the halachot of Yerushalayim. And in that, he has a chapter which deals with this question in terms of how to define Yerushalayim for the reading of the Megillah. And in order to, I didn't have that sefer in my database, so I just took a quote from it from a later shaila from Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss in the Minchat Yitzchak. So he said the following. He said, how did he define it? B'tzafon, shchunat Bukharim, 1,300 meter. He measured it. He said, listen, as the crow flies, Bukharim is 1,300 meters from the walls of the city in the north. Machanayim, which is nearby, a little bit further, 1,850 meter. Right? It's a small neighborhood. Many people don't even know that the name of that neighborhood, Machanayim. Sanhedria, 1,850 meter. The Katav. So this was those were the boundaries that he was talking about in the 1920s and 1930s. So he said, Katav d'nimsa shafilu dobar lahakel kan arba kulot. So now, how are we going to judge this? So we have four different things that we have to take into account. Mordechai Beit Dino tiknu al pi kav hachoma shaya bizmanam. First of all, that we don't go back to the Jebusite city, but we take the later city. And we'll add to it because that was the Roman rules. And we will take the largest possible measurement of what a meal is. As I said, is it 940 meters along the lines of the Grach Na'eh, or is it he says goes up to 1,400 meters. In the measurements that I saw, they talk about less, even according to the Chazon Ish, 1,200 meters, but we'll take 1,400. V'gam al pi otam poskim shemididah hi avirit yeshara. In other words, maybe the way that you measure, how do you measure? Do you measure as the crow flies in terms of direct airline, or do you say no? If you have to take the road, how long it will be, which is obviously going to be less. Right, just look at your ways and you'll see that. And if you take the northern areas of the Bukharin neighborhood, it's neither samuch nor is it nireh. So therefore, he says basically that his approach is very simple. He says you take what a mile radius, right, of the continuation from the walls. And what's within the walls, within that meal, that's going to be incorporated. We'll take the most makil approach, if you will, to the measurements, and you'll get to, let's say, 1,800 or so meters from the boundaries of the old city. And you can have a situation according to that where, one house will be considered to be samuch v'nireh, and another house won't be. That's the way it's going to be, right? So the first approach of it's the most conservative approach, is basically to say, what's Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim is the walled city, and only the walled city. And we have this idea that you're allowed to extend the walled city to include those areas that are nearby, however you define nearby. We'll do that. But beyond that, not. So if you're in Baka, for example, so then you will probably, or quite possibly, not have Purim on the 15th, according to the Rav Kaczynski. Right? Certainly, if you're further south, right, in the area of, let's say, Talpiot, no way will that be included in his measurements. And you take that in any direction and come to the same conclusion. So that is the opinion number one, the most conservative opinion. Opinion number two, which is the opinion here, I just took 3 lines from the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish says the following, but this is, I think, the majority opinion. The Chazon Ish says the following: So he says, if you add the homes that are adjacent, so then when you add homes that are adjacent, so then you can extend the boundary of the city, even if that goes beyond the mile. Mikol makom tzarich shelo yeh ben habatim ha'ela migrash panui k'shiur 70 amah b'shirayim kedin ibura shel ir. In other words, basically what this is saying is that we should take into consideration sprawl and natural growth of a city. So if you have a city which just has sprawl from one home, one neighborhood, one street to the next, so that's all going to be considered one city. But if you have any gap, which is this 70 amma, the 35 meters, and then he says in the next line, he's willing to go to 70 meters, 141 amot. So if you have that space, that green space that separates, so then you no longer are in the city. Now, I'll just add that this doesn't mean that if you have a park, let's say Gan Saker, that there's going to be a break now in Yerushalayim because of Gan Saker. Because on either side of Gan Saker, you have areas that are built, and basically the park is surrounded by, on all 4 sides, by, or certainly on 3 sides at the very least, by urban area. So the sprawl continues. But if you have a new neighborhood, let's say Ramot, when Ramot was first built, or Gilo, or even neighborhoods that we don't even think of as being outer neighborhoods, but when they were first established were outer neighborhoods, like Bayit Vagan, for example. So then it no longer becomes the part of the core city. Then it's considered to be an outer area, which if it's samuch, if it's close, if it's near then perhaps it could be included in it, but only under those circumstances and not because it's part of the natural city. So something which, let's say, Ramot, Gilo, etc. So those neighborhoods, when they were established, might, according to those opinions, be not reading on the 15th, but reading on the 14th. But as the sprawl has caught up to them, so then that would be considered within the city. So that's the second opinion. And I think most poskim followed that opinion, which leads us to the most expansive or liberal opinion. But before then, we have to ask a question, which I should have asked at the very beginning. Why should Samuch and Nira count at all? Or why shouldn't, especially if I take a look at the Ramban, like why shouldn't why is that a factor? Right? Why don't we simply say that, you know what, the city of Yerushalayim, the Ir Atika, within the walls, you will have 15. And anything outside of the walls, that's the day of the 14th. We could have said that. I don't think any one of us would have thought that is that's an illogical position to take. That makes a lot of sense, actually. And then, you know, there would have been all sorts of festivals in terms of people who are, the Ir Atika Purim on the 15th, and it would have been a great tourist attraction for all people to come into Yerushalayim to go to the Ir Atika on the 15th. Why do we talk about Samach V'Nira at all? So here, it's the Shagas Aryeh in his piece, his parish to Masechet Megillah called Turei Even. So this is written in the 18th century. So he says the following, that you have to look logically at what's going on. What is Samach V'Nira? Samach V'Nira are definitions of a municipal, not necessarily a municipal area, but if I have time, I'll get to Larry's question. The municipal, not the municipal boundaries, but rather with regard to the, if you will, the natural growth of a city. And he says the following, he says, it's impossible to split a city. Are you in the Eruv or are you out of the Eruv type of thing? Whereas if you're out of the Eruv, it's clearly the same city, but you know there's however you define an Eruv on Shabbat. So are you on the inside or the outside? And there's going to be a major difference in terms of your property value as a result. But that's an artificial boundary. A natural boundary for a city is Samuch V'Nira. And he says, and if you think about it in terms of the Ramban, in terms of how do I view myself as part of this city, and if there is and this was the case in terms of the way that medieval cities would work, is that if there would be an attack against the city, so the people who were living in the outlying areas would go into the walls because that's where they're going to have the greatest amount of defense. So who goes into the walls of a walled city? The people who are Samuch V'Nireh. And especially if you take the idea that we said in terms of the Rambam, that Samuch V'Nireh means that there's a distance, that's a set distance, the mile, that applies to even if it is Nireh, because it doesn't matter if you can see the city, it matters if you can get into the city quickly. Right? The distance is that it takes you to walk a kilometer, which according to Chazal is approximately 18 minutes. We don't have time to get into it, but that's where the idea of 18 minutes before Shabbat comes from. So the notion here is that it's the natural boundaries of a city. This led a later posek, the Kaf HaChaim, Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer, and just to make it a little bit faster, I took it from the quote in the tshuva of Rav Vadia, who says that the following, the idea of what is defined as close is defined by the transportation of the time. Imhu pachot mishiur mil b'nesiya berechet. If it's less than a mile distance today, he's writing in the night, if I'm not mistaken, he was writing in the 1920s. So then the amount of time it takes you to drive a car, that let's say 20 minutes. What's a 20-minute radius without traffic from a given place? So that's going to be considered the idea for the Samuch V'Nireh. According to this, which very few poskim accept, but you understand the logic of it. So a 20-minute radius from Yerushalayim is certainly, if you extend Yerushalayim the way that the Chazon Ish did. So basically, what's 20 minutes from Gilo to the south? That will get you all of Gush Etzion without any problem whatsoever. And if you're going to the west, all of Mivaseret will be included. So that's something which he wants to claim, and it's based on what's the boundaries of a city, what's the boundaries of a metropolitan area. That's really what it would be. As I said, it's not really. The Ravadia says that a kilometer is a kilometer is a kilometer, and that's what he says over here in the underlined point. But there is another idea, and that is, well, what's considered to be the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim? So on the one hand, and this is the Ravadia himself follows the Chazon Ish and says that in Ramot, at the time when he wrote this tshuva, when Ramot had just been established, that you should be reading on the 14th. But if you're included in the Eruv, there are those poskim that say if you're included in the Eruv of the town, so then, right, the Yerushalayim Eruv includes Ramot, and the Yerushalayim Eruv includes Ein Karem, etc., and Gilo, so you can walk it all on Shabbat. So then, as a result, it's all considered to be one city. That's another possibility, that you're using the halachic boundaries, if you will, of the town. There's a fourth possibility, which is the most makil in this regard, and that's to say, how do I define a city? I define a city based on the municipal boundaries. In other words, if I'm paying taxes, right? This is along the lines of that piece of the Shagat Aryeh, the Turei Even that I mentioned before. If I'm paying my taxes to the municipality of Jerusalem, so then I'm a Yerushalmi. And if there is and so any area which is considered to be within the municipal boundaries of a particular town would be considered to be that town. You could, as a result, make an argument that if let's say, if I ask, okay, so if I have a neighborhood which is just outside the boundaries, let's say, which would be Givat Yaakov, so that would be Samuch V'Nira, because even though it continues directly from Ramot, it's still not within the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim, but Ramot would be considered within the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim, and therefore would read on the 15th. But the neighboring town even would not be considered to be that, or would be considered to be Samuch V'Nira. So you have the full range of different opinions. I'm not paskening here. Generally speaking today, just about given the current municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim and the current sprawl from one neighborhood to the next, the overwhelming majority of Ashkenazim today, for example, will celebrate in Ramot on the 15th. Amongst the Sfardim, it's a machloket of how to deal with it. But as the sprawl reaches, so then there are fewer and fewer people who keep the 14th in Ramot. What will be if and when the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim are extended even further? There, for at least a decade, there's been talk of extending the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim to include, let's say, Mivaseret, or to include Ma'alei Adumim in the east. So then the discussion will shoot up again. But basically, the mainstream position, you have let's just review it again. You have the polls. You have on the one hand, the extreme conservative position of Rav Tukachinsky, which is to view Yerushalayim as the walled city, and to basically say anything outside is not Yerushalayim, it's Samuch V'Nira, period. The extreme and the other direction is to say anything which is within the municipal boundaries of Yerushalayim is Yerushalayim. That's not Samuch V'Nira. That is just simply Yerushalayim. The middle position is to say that you require a continued habitation line from one neighborhood to the next to be included in Yerushalayim for the halachot, and the moment that you have a break in that line, so then it's considered to be Samuch V'Nireh, and it will be defined based on whether you are within the kilometer, whether you can see from one point to the other easily, based on either the Shita of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ritva that we spoke about before, or the more conservative position of the Rambam. So that's I apologize for going a little bit over time. That is the shir. The most important thing, I think, is that whether we're celebrating on the 14th or the 15th or on both because of a suffix, so it should be a Purim Sameach for each and every one of us and for all of Beit Yisrael.